The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Colorado, as Abigail Blackburn's husband fell to the ground, his once vibrant eyes staring lifelessly at the sky. The year was 1875, and in this small frontier town, death was no stranger, but it had never felt so personal before. Abigail's hands trembled as she clutched Thomas Blackburn's bloodied coat to her chest, the fabric still warm from his body, still smelling of hemp pine, tobacco, and now the metallic scent of blood. Her tears created dark spots on the worn material as the crowd around her dispersed, leaving her alone with her grief in the middle of the street. "Madam," a deep voice broke through her sobs. "You shouldn't be out here like this." She looked up through tear-blurred vision to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. A stranger, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but his voice gentle despite its roughness. "He's gone," she whispered, her fingers digging deeper into the fabric. "They shot him. For what? A few dollars and some cattle?" The stranger knelt beside her, and she could see his face now weathered like tanned leather, with eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar ran from his temple to his jaw, telling tales of a hard life lived. "I'm Deacon Grayson," he said, offering his hand. "Let me help you home, Mrs. Blackburn." "How do you know my name?" she asked, suddenly wary. "Small town," he answered simply. "And your husband was a good man, known throughout these parts." Abigail nodded, accepting his hand but not relinquishing the coat. She allowed him to help her to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her skirts. "The undertaker will come for him," Deacon said, nodding toward Thomas's body now being covered by the town sheriff. "Is there someone who can stay with you tonight?" Abigail shook her head. They had moved to Willow Creek just 6 months ago, seeking opportunity in the new frontier. Friends were few, and family was back east. "Then I'll see you safely home and find someone," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they walked through the town, people turned to stare, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Abigail kept her eyes fixed ahead, one hand still clutching the bloodied coat, the other held firmly in Deacon's calloused grip. Her small house appeared at the edge of town, a modest wooden structure that Thomas had been so proud of. "A place of our own," he'd said when they first arrived. Now it loomed before her, a reminder of all she had lost. Inside, Deacon lit the lamps as Abigail sank into a chair, still clinging to the coat. The evening shadows grew longer, but she barely noticed as grief consumed her. "Mrs. Blackburn," Deacon said after some time had passed, "you need to rest." "I can't," she whispered. "I can't let go of him." Deacon knelt before her, his eyes level with hers. "The coat won't bring him back," he said gently. "And you're staining yourself with his blood." Abigail looked down to see that the blood had indeed transferred to her dress, her hands, everywhere. Fresh tears spilled from her eyes. "May I?" Deacon asked, his hands hovering near the coat. When she didn't respond, he slowly, carefully, took it from her grasp. "I'll clean this for you," he promised. "You'll have it back, but not like this. Not with this reminder." Something in his words, in the kindness of this stranger, broke through her shock. Abigail nodded, releasing her grip on the last physical connection to her husband. "I'll be back tomorrow," Deacon said, standing with the coat folded over his arm. "And Mrs. Blackburn? The men who did this, they won't go unpunished." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet house. That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. The bed felt too large, too empty, without Thomas beside her. She paced the small house, touching his things, his favorite book, his shaving brush, the chair where he sat to remove his boots. Each item a memory, each memory a fresh wound. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a beauty that seemed obscene in the face of her loss. She had just made coffee when a knock came at the door. Deacon stood on her porch, hat in hand, the coat now clean and mended draped over his arm. Behind him, a small group of women from town waited with covered dishes and solemn expressions. "The ladies of the church society thought you might need some company," he explained, stepping aside to let them enter. "And some food." The women bustled in, filling her kitchen with quiet activity and murmured condolences. As they set out food and brewed fresh coffee, Deacon handed Abigail the coat. "Thank you," she said, fingers tracing the neat stitches that had closed the bullet hole. "You didn't have to do this." "I made a promise," he replied, "and I keep my word." There was something in his expression that caught her attention, a determination that went beyond simple kindness. "What did you mean last night? About the men who killed Thomas?" Deacon's jaw tightened. "I'm a bounty hunter, Mrs. Blackburn. I've been tracking the Ryder gang for 3 months. Your husband was their latest victim, but I aim to make sure he's their last." "You're going after them?" she asked, a mix of fear and hope in her voice. "I am," he confirmed. "They've left a trail of widows from Kansas to Colorado, and it ends here." Abigail clutched the coat tighter. "When you find them, when you find the one who shot Thomas, tell him his wife saw his face. Tell him I'll remember it until my dying day." Deacon nodded, his expression grim. "I'll tell him, and then I'll make sure justice is done." As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him. "Mr. Grayson, be careful. I wouldn't wish this emptiness on anyone else." He paused, looking back at her with those storm-gray eyes. "When I return, Mrs. Blackburn, I promise you'll find some peace." With that, he placed his hat on his head and strode to where his horse was tethered. Abigail watched him ride away, the coat still in her arms, wondering if she would ever see him again. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief and formalities. The funeral was held, and Thomas was laid to rest in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Willow Creek. The women from town continued to visit, bringing food and conversation, trying to fill the emptiness of her house with their presence. 2 weeks after Thomas's death, Abigail sat on her porch in the cool evening air, his coat across her lap. She had taken to wearing it in the evenings when the loneliness was most acute. The fabric still held a trace of his scent beneath the soap Deacon had used to clean it. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road. A rider approached, his silhouette familiar even in the fading light. Deacon Grayson dismounted in front of her house, his clothes dusty from the trail, his face more lined than she remembered. "You came back," she said, rising to her feet. "I said I would." He climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he did. "May I sit with you a while?" Abigail nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside hers. "Did you find them?" Deacon settled into the chair with a weary sigh. "I did. The Ryder gang won't trouble anyone else." "Are they dead?" she asked, her voice steady. "2 are," he answered honestly. "The others are headed to Denver to stand trial, including the one who shot your husband." Abigail closed her eyes, expecting to feel satisfaction or relief. Instead, there was just a hollow ache where those emotions should have been. "Did you tell him what I said?" "I did." He didn't have much to say in return. Deacon paused, studying her face in the twilight. "Does it help, knowing they'll pay for what they did?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Nothing brings Thomas back. Nothing fills this house with his voice again." They sat in silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "What will you do now?" Abigail finally asked. Deacon shifted in his chair. "I've been thinking about that." The reward for the Ryder gang was substantial, enough to buy a small spread, maybe raise some cattle. "You're giving up bounty hunting?" "I'm getting too old for it," he said with a hint of a smile, "and too tired of seeing the worst of what people can do to each other." Abigail nodded, understanding the weariness in his voice. "Where will you go?" "I was thinking of staying around these parts," Deacon said, his gaze now fixed on the distant mountains. Willow Creek seems like a good place to put down roots. Something warm flickered in Abigail's chest at his words, not happiness. It was too soon for that, but perhaps the first stirring of hope that life might continue beyond grief. The ranch next to the Johnson place is for sale, she said. Good water, decent grazing land. Deacon looked at her with surprise. You know a lot about ranching for a town woman. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, she explained. And Thomas wanted to try his hand at cattle someday. He used to talk about it in the evenings. Would it bother you? He asked carefully. Having me around as a reminder of what happened? Abigail considered his question. You're not a reminder of the bad, Mr. Grayson. You're the one who kept your promise, who brought justice when no one else could. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Martha Jenkins, one of the church ladies who had appointed herself Abigail's guardian. She carried a basket of fresh bread and looked suspiciously at Deacon. Mrs. Blackburn, she greeted with a tight smile. I see you have company. Mr. Grayson was just telling me that the men who killed Thomas have been caught, Abigail explained. Martha's expression softened slightly. Well, that's a mercy, I suppose. Though it won't bring Thomas back. No, madam, it won't, Deacon agreed, standing and placing his hat back on his head. But sometimes justice is all we can offer. Will you stay for supper, Mr. Grayson? Abigail asked, surprising herself with the invitation. To thank you for what you've done. Martha made a small sound of disapproval, but Abigail ignored it. She had spent 2 weeks being the proper grieving widow. Tonight, she wanted company that didn't look at her with pity. I'd be honored, Deacon said. Let me see to my horse, and I'll return. As he descended the porch steps, Martha turned to Abigail with raised eyebrows. People will talk, she warned. A widow entertaining a man so soon after burying her husband. Let them talk, Abigail replied, rising from her chair with Thomas's coat still around her shoulders. Mr. Grayson has done more for me than anyone in this town. He deserves a decent meal and my thanks. Martha pressed her lips together, but said nothing more as she followed Abigail into the house. The meal was simple roast chicken, potatoes, and the fresh bread Martha had brought, but Deacon ate as if it were a feast, complimenting Abigail's cooking with genuine appreciation. Martha stayed, of course, her presence ensuring propriety, though her disapproving glances spoke volumes. After the dishes were cleared, Deacon reached into his vest pocket and produced a small object, sliding it across the table to Abigail. I thought you should have this, he said quietly. It was Thomas's pocket watch, the one he always carried. The silver case was dented now, and the glass cracked, but it was unmistakably his. Where did you find it? Abigail asked, her voice barely above a whisper. One of the Ryder gang had it, Deacon explained. Said he took it as a trophy. Martha gasped at the bluntness of his words, but Abigail was grateful for his honesty. She opened the watch, revealing the inscription inside. To Thomas. All my love, Abigail. Thank you, she said, closing her fingers around the timepiece. This means more than I can say. Deacon nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's late, he said, rising from his chair. I should find a room at the hotel. Certainly, Martha agreed too quickly. I'm sure Mrs. Blackburn needs her rest. Abigail walked him to the door, aware of Martha hovering nearby. Will I see you again before you decide about the ranch? She asked. You will, Deacon promised. Rest well, Mrs. Blackburn. After he left, Martha didn't waste time expressing her concerns. Abigail, I know you're grateful to Mr. Grayson, but you must be careful. A woman alone is vulnerable to more than just physical danger. What are you suggesting, Martha? Abigail asked tiredly. Only that men like that, rough men who make their living with a gun, aren't the sort to settle down. And even if he does buy that ranch, he's not suitable company for a respectable widow. Abigail sighed, too exhausted to argue. Thank you for your concern and for staying tonight, but I can manage my own affairs. Martha left reluctantly, extracting a promise that Abigail would attend church on Sunday. Alone again, Abigail sat by the fire, Thomas's watch in one hand, his coat still around her shoulders. For the first time since his death, her tears were not solely for what she had lost, but also for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. True to his word, Deacon returned the next day, this time in the morning light. Abigail was in the garden behind her house, tending to the vegetables that had been neglected in the weeks following Thomas's death. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackburn," he called, standing at the garden gate rather than entering uninvited. Abigail straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her face with a soil-stained hand. "Mr. Grayson, you're out and about early. Went to look at that ranch you mentioned," he said. "You were right about the water and the grazing land. Are you going to buy it?" she asked, setting down her trowel and wiping her hands on her apron. "I made an offer," he confirmed. The owner seemed eager to sell. Said he's heading to California to try his luck in the gold fields. "Fool's errand," Abigail muttered, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. That was unkind." Deacon's mouth quirked in a half-smile. But not untrue. The real money was never in the finding of gold, but in the selling of dreams. Abigail found herself smiling back, the expression feeling foreign on her face after weeks of grief. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered. "I was about to take a break anyway." Deacon hesitated, glancing toward the street. "I wouldn't want to cause talk." "Martha Jenkins has already decided you're a bad influence," Abigail said with unexpected lightness. "One cup of coffee on my back porch won't make it worse." He chuckled at that, a warm sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "In that case, I'd be much obliged." They sat on the back porch, where they were visible enough to maintain propriety, but private enough to speak freely. Deacon told her about his plans for the ranch, modest at first, with the potential to grow if the land proved as good as it seemed. "I've spent 15 years chasing men across the frontier," he said, cradling his coffee cup in hands that bore the scars of his profession. "Might be nice to watch something grow for a change." "It's not easy work," Abigail cautioned. "Ranching has its own hardships." "All life has hardships, Mrs. Blackburn," he replied. "The trick is finding the ones worth enduring." She studied him over the rim of her cup, seeing beyond the rough exterior to the thoughtful man beneath. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Grayson." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder. Colder." "The bounty hunters I've heard about don't typically clean bloodstained coats or return pocket watches to widows." Deacon looked away, his gaze settling on the distant mountains. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he admitted. "But I've tried to hold on to whatever decency I started with." "I think you've succeeded," Abigail said softly. The moment stretched between them, comfortable, yet charged with something neither was ready to name. "I should go," Deacon finally said, setting down his empty cup. "The banker wanted my answer by noon." Abigail walked him to the front of the house. As he mounted his horse, she called up to him. "Sunday is the town social after church. Will you come?" Deacon looked surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure that's wise? Martha Jenkins might have a fit." Abigail smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Let her. I could use a friend who doesn't treat me like I might shatter at any moment." "Then I'll be there," he promised, tipping his hat before riding away. Abigail watched him go, aware of a lightness in her chest that had been absent for too long. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of healing. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late spring flowers. Abigail dressed with care for church, choosing a dark blue dress rather than the black she had worn since Thomas's death. It wasn't quite proper for a widow of only 3 weeks, but she couldn't bear another day in mourning clothes. The church service was as it always was, Reverend Porter droning on about sin and redemption while the congregation fanned themselves and children fidgeted in the hard pews. Abigail sat alone, feeling the stares and whispers as people noticed her change of attire. After the service, the social began on the church grounds. Tables laden with food were set up beneath the oak trees, and someone had brought a fiddle to provide music. Abigail lingered at the edge of the gathering, searching the crowd for Deacon, but not seeing him. Mrs. Blackburn, Martha Jenkins approached, her eyes immediately taking in the blue dress. "I'm surprised to see you here, and in such colorful attire." "Thomas hated to see me in black," Abigail said, the half-truth coming easily. "He always said it made me look pale." Martha's lips pursed, but before she could respond, a murmur went through the crowd as Deacon Grayson appeared. He had cleaned up considerably. His clothes were neat, his hair trimmed, and his face freshly shaved. He looked less like a bounty hunter and more like a respectable rancher. "Mr. Grayson," Reverend Porter greeted him with obvious surprise. "We don't often see you at our gatherings." "I've been away," Deacon said simply. "But I've decided to settle in Willow Creek. Bought the old Miller place yesterday." This announcement caused a stir among the townspeople. Several men approached to shake Deacon's hand, while the women clustered together, speculating in hushed voices. Abigail remained where she was, watching as Deacon navigated the social niceties with unexpected grace. Eventually, he made his way to her, nodding politely to Martha before addressing Abigail. "Mrs. Blackburn, you look well today." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she replied, aware of Martha's disapproving gaze. "Congratulations on your purchase. Would you care to walk with me?" he asked, offering his arm. "I'd value your advice on what crops might do well on the eastern field." Martha stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackburn, perhaps it would be better if you stayed." "Thank you, Martha," Abigail interrupted firmly. "But Mr. Grayson has asked for my help, and I'm happy to provide it." She took Deacon's arm, feeling the solid strength of him through his shirt sleeve, and allowed him to lead her away from the gathering. They walked toward the church cemetery, a place where they could talk privately while remaining in full view of the town. "You caused quite a stir," Abigail said once they were out of earshot. "So did you," Deacon replied, glancing at her blue dress. "Is this the first time you've worn something besides black since?" "Yes," she admitted. It felt like time. They reached the cemetery gate and stopped. Thomas's grave was visible, the earth still fresh, the wooden marker temporary until a proper stone could be placed. "I hope I didn't overstep," Deacon said quietly. "Asking you to walk with me." "You didn't," Abigail assured him. "Though Martha will likely lecture me about propriety later." "What will you tell her?" Abigail considered the question. "That I'm a grown woman who can choose her own company. And that my husband would want me to live, not just exist." Deacon's eyes softened as he looked at her. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said, her gaze drifting to the grave. "He was kind and hard-working and full of dreams for our future. Dreams that died with him." "Not all of them," Deacon said. "You're still here, still capable of making new dreams." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Abigail felt a flutter of something in her chest, not guilt, as she might have expected, but a tentative hope. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "When do you move in?" "Tomorrow," Deacon answered. "The house needs work, but it's sound. The previous owner left most of the furniture, said it wasn't worth taking to California. And the cattle? I'm starting small. 10 head to begin with, maybe more in the fall if the summer goes well." They continued their walk, circling back toward the church gathering as they discussed practical matters of ranching and homesteading. By the time they rejoined the social, Abigail was laughing at Deacon's description of his first disastrous attempt at milking a cow as a boy. "Mrs. Blackburn seems to be recovering well," someone whispered as they passed. "Too well, if you ask me," came the reply. "Her husband not a month in the ground." Abigail's smile faltered, and Deacon's expression darkened. "Pay them no mind," he said, his voice low. "People will always find something to gossip about." "I know," she sighed, "but they're right in a way." It hasn't been a month. Should I still be weeping every hour? Unable to laugh or enjoy a conversation? Grief doesn't follow rules, Abigail, Deacon said, using her given name for the first time. And healing isn't betrayal. The sincerity in his eyes steadied her, giving her permission to feel whatever she was feeling without judgment. Thank you, she said simply. As the social wound down, Deacon walked Abigail home, maintaining a respectful distance that would give the gossips little to work with. At her door, he removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I'll be busy at the ranch for the next week or so, he said, getting things in order. Of course, Abigail nodded, ignoring the flicker of disappointment she felt. That's to be expected. But I was wondering if you might consider riding out to see the place next Sunday after church, Deacon continued. Given your knowledge of farming, your advice would be valuable. Abigail recognized the offer for what it was, a chance to continue their friendship away from the prying eyes of town. I'd like that, she said, though I'm not sure how I'd get there. Thomas sold our wagon and horse when we moved to town. I could come for you, Deacon suggested. If that wouldn't cause too much talk. It would cause talk no matter what, Abigail said with a small smile. But yes, I'd appreciate the ride. With a tip of his hat and a promise to return the following Sunday, Deacon left. Abigail watched him go, then entered her empty house. For the first time since Thomas's death, the silence didn't feel oppressive. The week passed slowly. Abigail kept busy with her garden and household chores, and even ventured to apply for a position at the general store, which was looking for help. Mr. Peterson, the owner, hired her on the spot, perhaps out of pity or perhaps because she had a good head for numbers. Either way, the work was a welcome distraction from her grief and loneliness. Sunday arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Abigail dressed conservatively for church, this time in gray rather than blue, a compromise between mourning and moving forward. After the service, she declined Martha's invitation to Sunday dinner, explaining that she had accepted an invitation to see Deacon Grayson's new ranch. Alone, Martha asked, scandalized. Abigail, you cannot possibly. I won't be riding out alone with him. Abigail lied smoothly. Mrs. Peterson from the store is joining us. Her husband used to ranch in Kansas, and she has valuable experience. The fabrications satisfied Martha, though Abigail felt a twinge of guilt as she waited on her porch for Deacon. He arrived promptly, driving a small wagon rather than riding horseback. I thought this might be more comfortable, he explained as he helped her up to the seat, and less likely to soil your dress. The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed Abigail as they set off, the town falling away behind them as they followed the road west. The rain held off, though the air was heavy with moisture, giving the landscape a misty, dreamlike quality. You look well, Deacon said after they had traveled in comfortable silence for a time. The store job agrees with you? You heard about that? Abigail asked, surprised. Small town, he reminded her with a smile. I stopped in yesterday for supplies. Mr. Peterson spoke highly of your work. It's not challenging, she admitted. But it's good to have something to do. Something to think about besides. She trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. Deacon nodded, understanding. That's why I bought the ranch. Idle hands lead to dark thoughts. The Miller Ranch, now the Grayson Ranch, came into view as they crested a small hill. It was modest but well situated, with a sturdy two-room cabin, a barn, and several outbuildings. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, and beyond it, rolling grassland stretched toward the distant mountains. It's beautiful, Abigail said as Deacon brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. It needs work, he replied, jumping down and coming around to help her descend. But it has potential. He showed her around the property, pointing out his plans for improvements and seeking her opinion on everything from crop rotation to the placement of a chicken coop. Abigail found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, offering suggestions and sharing what she knew from her childhood on her father's farm. By the time they reached the cabin, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. "Just in time," Deacon said, holding the door for her. The interior was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a smaller bedroom visible through an open doorway. A fire burned in the stone hearth, taking the chill from the air. "It's not much," Deacon said, suddenly self-conscious as Abigail looked around. "But it's mine." "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "A good place to build a life." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof as Deacon prepared coffee and Abigail explored the main room. A bookshelf caught her attention, filled with volumes that seemed at odds with her image of the rough bounty hunter. "You read Emerson?" she asked, surprised. Deacon glanced up from the stove. "And Thoreau, Whitman, Hawthorne. Books are good company on long trails." "Thomas loved books too," Abigail said, running her fingers along the spines. "He taught school back east before we came west." "What brought you here?" Deacon asked, bringing 2 steaming cups to the table. "Dreams," she answered, accepting the coffee and sitting across from him. Thomas had been reading about the opportunities in Colorado. New towns needing teachers, land available for those willing to work it. She sighed. It all seemed so possible then. And now? Abigail gazed out the window at the rain-washed landscape. "Now I'm not sure. I never planned to be a widow at 26, living alone in a town where I know almost no one." "You could go back east," Deacon suggested, though something in his tone suggested he hoped she wouldn't. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but there's nothing for me there either. My parents are gone, and my brother moved to Boston years ago." She took a sip of coffee. "Besides, despite everything, I've grown fond of Willow Creek. And the West still has its possibilities." "Yes," Deacon agreed softly. "It does." They talked through the afternoon as the rain continued, sharing stories of their lives before Willow Creek. Deacon spoke of his childhood in Kentucky, his time as a Union soldier during the Civil War, and how he drifted into bounty hunting afterward. Abigail told him about growing up on a Pennsylvania farm, her brief time teaching at a girls' school, and her courtship with Thomas. "He proposed to me at a harvest dance," she recalled, smiling at the memory. "Pulled me behind the barn and dropped to one knee in the mud. He was so nervous he forgot the speech he'd prepared." "Smart man," Deacon said. "Knew a good woman when he saw one." The compliment brought a flush to Abigail's cheeks. "What about you?" she asked. "Did you ever come close to settling down?" A shadow crossed Deacon's face. "Once," he said. "Her name was Caroline. We were engaged before the war." "What happened?" "I came back different," he said simply. "And she couldn't reconcile the boy who left with the man who returned. We parted ways, and last I heard, she married a banker in Louisville." "I'm sorry," Abigail said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. "Don't be," Deacon replied. "It was for the best. I wasn't fit company for anyone in those days." The rain finally let up as evening approached, the setting sun breaking through the clouds to cast golden light across the damp landscape. "I should get you back to town," Deacon said reluctantly, "before it gets dark." "Yes," Abigail agreed, though part of her wished to stay in this peaceful place where she felt more at ease than she had in weeks. "People will talk if we're out too late." Deacon smiled wryly. "They'll talk anyway." Mrs. Peterson wasn't very convincing. "You heard about that?" Abigail asked, embarrassed. "Mrs. Peterson told her husband, who mentioned it when I stopped by the store," Deacon explained. "He thought it was quite amusing." "I'm sorry," Abigail said. "I just needed to give Martha a reason not to object." "No need to apologize," Deacon assured her as they stepped outside into the fresh, rain-washed air. "I understand the need for discretion." The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts as twilight deepened around them. When they reached Abigail's house, several neighbors were out on their porches, watching with undisguised interest as Deacon helped her down from the wagon. Thank you for today, Abigail said, conscious of the eyes upon them. Your ranch is lovely. Thank you for your advice, Deacon replied formally. It was most helpful. They stood for a moment, neither quite ready to part, until a neighbor's cough broke the spell. Good night, Mr. Grayson, Abigail said, stepping toward her door. Mrs. Blackburn, he acknowledged with a tip of his hat. Until next time. As she entered her house, Abigail knew there would be fresh gossip tomorrow. But for the first time, she found she didn't care. The emptiness that had consumed her since Thomas's death had receded, just a little, making room for something new to grow. Over the next month, Abigail and Deacon settled into a cautious rhythm. He would come to town every few days for supplies, always stopping by the general store to chat with her. On Sundays after church, she would ride out to his ranch, ostensibly to help with the garden he was establishing or to advise on household matters. The town talked, of course. Some, like Martha Jenkins, disapproved of the friendship, considering it disrespectful to Thomas's memory. Others were more understanding, recognizing that life continued even after loss. Mr. Peterson, who had taken a fatherly interest in Abigail, defended her to the gossips. The poor woman has a right to friends, he told Martha one day when she was voicing her concerns in the store. And Grayson's proven himself a decent man. Pays his bills on time, helps his neighbors, minds his own business. It's not decent for a widow to spend so much time alone with a single man, Martha insisted. Especially so soon after her husband's passing. Times are changing, Martha, Mr. Peterson replied. And out here in the West, we can't always stand on Eastern formalities. Abigail, overhearing from the storeroom, felt a rush of gratitude toward her employer. It was true that her friendship with Deacon defied convention, but it had become a lifeline during her darkest days. June turned to July, bringing scorching heat that baked the earth and tested the resolve of farmers and ranchers throughout the region. Deacon's small herd thrived despite the conditions, thanks in part to the reliable creek that ran through his property. His vegetable garden, planted with Abigail's guidance, yielded its first harvest, providing fresh produce that supplemented his bachelor meals of beans and beef. On a particularly hot Sunday in mid-July, Abigail arrived at the ranch to find Deacon completing a new addition to the cabin, a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the structure. "What do you think?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow as she approached. "It's wonderful," Abigail said, admiring the sturdy construction. "Perfect for catching the evening breeze." "That was my thought," he agreed, offering her a hand up the steps. "And for watching the sunset." He had set two rocking chairs on the porch, along with a small table between them. A pitcher of lemonade waited, beaded with condensation in the summer heat. "You've thought of everything," Abigail said, sinking gratefully into one of the chairs as Deacon poured her a glass. "I had help," he reminded her. "Your suggestion about the orientation of the porch to catch the breeze was spot on." They sipped their lemonade in comfortable silence, watching as a pair of hawks circled lazily in the clear blue sky. In the distance, Deacon's small herd of cattle grazed near the creek, their red-brown coats standing out against the golden grass. "I've been thinking," Deacon said after a time, "about expanding the herd before winter. The Johnsons are selling some of their stock, and I could probably handle another 10 head. "That sounds wise," Abigail agreed. "Especially if you can get them at a good price." "Johnson offered me a fair deal," Deacon said. "But it would mean more work. I'd need to add on to the barn, increase my hay storage." "You could hire help," Abigail suggested. "There are always young men looking for ranch work." Deacon nodded thoughtfully. "I could, but I was thinking of a different arrangement." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I was thinking of a partnership." Abigail looked at him questioningly. "A partnership?" "With you," Deacon clarified, his eyes meeting hers steadily. "You have the knowledge and the business sense. I have the land and the experience with cattle. Together, We could build something substantial. Abigail's pulse quickened as she realized what he was proposing. Deacon, are you asking me to go into business with you? In a manner of speaking, he said, setting down his glass and turning fully toward her. Abigail, I know it soon. I know people will talk. But these past months have shown me what kind of woman you are: strong, intelligent, resilient. I find myself thinking of you constantly, planning my days around the times I'll see you. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I'm not asking you to forget Thomas. I would never ask that. But I am asking if you might consider a future that includes me as your husband. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Part of her had known this moment was coming, had felt the growing connection between them. But hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to answer now, Deacon assured her. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know how I feel, and that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Abigail looked out over the land, this place that had come to represent possibility and new beginnings. Then she looked back at Deacon, at the quiet strength and kindness in his face. Thomas would want me to be happy, she said slowly. He told me once, after his brother died, that the greatest dishonor to the dead is for the living to stop living. Wise man, Deacon said softly. Yes, he was, Abigail agreed. And I think he would approve of you, of us. Hope kindled in Deacon's eyes. Does that mean? It means I need time, Abigail said. But it also means that when I'm ready, my answer will be yes. The smile that broke across Deacon's face was like sunrise after a long night. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I can wait, he promised. For as long as it takes. They spent the remainder of the afternoon discussing practical matters, how they would manage the ranch together, what improvements would be needed if Abigail were to live there, how they would handle the inevitable gossip from town. By the time Deacon drove her home in the cooling evening air, they had sketched out the beginnings of a shared future. At her door, Deacon took her hand once more. May I call on you properly next Sunday? Take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. Abigail smiled at the formality. Yes, you may, Mr. Grayson. I would be delighted. The town's reaction to their official courtship was mixed, as expected. Some, particularly the older residents like Martha Jenkins, maintained that it was too soon, that Abigail was dishonoring Thomas's memory. Others, especially those who had witnessed her grief and subsequent healing, were supportive. Life's too short and too hard out here to deny yourself happiness when you find it, Mrs. Peterson told Abigail as they worked together in the store. My first husband died of fever 6 months after we arrived in Colorado. If I hadn't married Mr. Peterson a year later, I don't know how I would have survived. Abigail appreciated the support, but it was the growing certainty in her own heart that mattered most. Each day spent with Deacon confirmed what she already knew, that it was possible to honor Thomas's memory while also building a new life, a new love. August brought thunderstorms that broke the heat and turned the parched landscape green again. On a Sunday evening after a particularly spectacular storm, Deacon and Abigail sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching as the setting sun painted the remaining clouds in shades of pink and gold. I received a letter from the stonecutter in Denver, Abigail said, breaking a comfortable silence. Thomas's headstone will be ready next month. Deacon nodded, understanding the significance of this milestone. Would you like me to go with you when it's placed? Yes, Abigail said, grateful for his sensitivity. I would. And afterward, if you're still willing, I'd like to discuss a wedding date. Deacon turned to her, his expression one of cautious joy. You're sure? I'm sure, she confirmed. I'll always love Thomas. He was part of my life, my first love. But my heart has room for you too, Deacon. Different, but no less real. He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted. "After all the years of hunting men, of seeing the worst humanity has to offer. I never thought I'd find peace. Or love." "You promised me a future of peace that first night," Abigail reminded him. "When you took Thomas's bloody coat and told me justice would be done." "I remember," Deacon said. "But I never imagined that future would include me." "I think perhaps it was always meant to," Abigail said softly. "As if Thomas somehow knew you would be there for me." They sat together as twilight deepened into night, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound echoing across the valley before being answered by another. "Life out here isn't easy," Deacon said after a time. "There will be hard winters, dry summers, all manner of challenges." "I know," Abigail replied, "but we'll face them together." In September, Thomas's headstone was placed in the small cemetery overlooking Willow Creek. It was a simple marker, solid granite with his name, dates, and the inscription Abigail had chosen, "Beloved husband who lived with courage and dreamed of the West." Deacon stood respectfully beside her as the stonecutter completed his work. When the man departed, leaving them alone, Abigail laid a bouquet of late summer wildflowers at the base of the stone. "He would have loved this place," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "The openness, the possibility. He helped create it," Deacon said. "Every person who comes west, who builds a life here, becomes part of what this land will be." Abigail nodded, taking comfort in the thought. "Including us." They walked back to town hand in hand, no longer concerned about who might see or what might be said. The next day, they spoke with Reverend Porter about a wedding date. The clergyman was initially reluctant, suggesting they wait a full year from Thomas's death, but eventually agreed to perform the ceremony in November, 6 months after the tragedy. "It will be a simple affair," Abigail told Martha Jenkins, who had gradually come to accept, if not fully approve of, the relationship. "Just a few friends at the church, then a small reception at the hotel." "You'll need a dress," Martha said practically, her resistance finally crumbling in the face of Abigail's obvious happiness. "And someone to help you prepare. If you'll allow me." "I would be grateful," Abigail said sincerely, recognizing the olive branch being extended. As the wedding day approached, Deacon worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for his bride. He added a second bedroom to the cabin, installed glass windows to replace the oiled paper that had previously let in light, and built furniture for their shared home. Abigail contributed linens, kitchenware, and the few personal items she had brought from Pennsylvania. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with frost silvering the grass and a thin layer of ice on the water troughs. Abigail woke early in her small house in town, knowing it would be the last time she slept there. Most of her belongings had already been moved to the ranch. Only her wedding dress and a few necessities remained. Martha arrived shortly after sunrise, bringing with her a breakfast basket and a small bouquet of hothouse flowers from Denver, a wedding gift from Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. As Martha helped her dress and arrange her hair, Abigail felt a curious blend of emotions: happiness, anticipation, a touch of nervousness, and a gentle sadness that Thomas was not there to see this new chapter of her life. "You look beautiful," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Abigail wore a dress of soft blue silk, not the traditional white of a first-time bride, but a color that complemented her fair complexion and brought out the gold in her hair. "Thank you," Abigail said, turning to embrace the older woman. "For everything." Martha blinked back unexpected tears. "I just wanted what was best for you," she said. "And I see now that Deacon Grayson is a good man. Thomas would approve." The church was filled with most of the town's residents when Abigail arrived. Mr. Peterson waited to escort her down the aisle, having volunteered to stand in for her absent father. At the altar, Deacon turned as she entered, and the look on his face wonder, love, Gratitude told her everything she needed to know about the rightness of their decision. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful, with Reverend Porter acknowledging both the love that had been lost and the new love that had bloomed in its wake. When Deacon and Abigail exchanged vows, promising to cherish and support each other through all the challenges life might bring, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Porter declared. "Mr. Grayson, you may kiss your bride." Deacon's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a commitment to the future they would build together. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Abigail caught sight of Thomas's pocket watch, which Deacon had placed in his vest pocket as a tribute to the man who had once been the center of her world. The reception at the hotel was joyous, with music, dancing, and more food than the small community could possibly consume. Even those who had initially disapproved of the match seemed won over by the couple's evident happiness. As the celebration wound down, Deacon helped Abigail into the wagon that would take them to their ranch, their home. They had decided against a traditional honeymoon, preferring instead to begin their married life in the place they would build together. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" Deacon asked as they drove away from town, the stars beginning to appear in the early evening sky. "Very," Abigail confirmed, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I'll admit it feels strange to have a new name." "You'll always be Abigail," Deacon said. "No name change can alter who you are." They arrived at the ranch to find it transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch posts, casting a warm glow over the freshly painted cabin. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the table was set with their best dishes and a bottle of wine, the work of friends who had slipped away from town earlier to prepare this welcome. "It's perfect," Abigail breathed, taking in the scene. "Welcome home," Deacon said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Abigail felt the last lingering shadows of grief recede. There would always be a place in her heart for Thomas, a gentle sorrow for what might have been, but there was room too for this new love, this second chance at happiness. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she whispered against Deacon's chest. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died too." "I understand," he said, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "When I first saw you, kneeling in the street with his coat in your arms, I felt your pain as if it were my own. All I wanted was to take some of that burden from you." "You did," Abigail said. "You gave me justice when you caught those men. And then you gave me something to live for again." "You did the same for me," Deacon told her. "Before you, this ranch was just a place to stop wandering. Now it's a home, a future." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the promise of that future surrounding them like a blanket. The first year of their marriage brought both joys and challenges. Winter arrived early, with November blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Deacon's expanded herd weathered the storms well, thanks to the preparations they had made, but the harsh conditions tested their resilience. Spring came late but gloriously, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new calves strengthening the herd. Abigail expanded her garden, adding herbs and flowers to the vegetables, creating a vibrant oasis near the cabin. Together, they built a chicken coop and added a milk cow to their growing menagerie. In May, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, they rode into town together. Abigail placed flowers on his grave, and she and Deacon sat for a time in quiet remembrance. The pain was still there, but muted now, transformed into a gentle sadness that acknowledged what had been lost without diminishing what had been found. "I have something to tell you," Abigail said as they rode back to the ranch, the spring sunshine warm on their faces. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be sure of before I said anything." Deacon looked at her questioningly. "What is it?" "I'm with child," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "Due in November, the doctor thinks." Deacon reined the wagon to a stop, his expression a mixture of shock and joy. A baby? We're going to have a baby? Yes, Abigail confirmed, laughing at his reaction. Are you happy? In answer, Deacon pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Happy doesn't begin to describe it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. A child. Our child. The news spread quickly through Willow Creek, met with congratulations and good wishes from most of the town. Martha Jenkins immediately began knitting baby clothes, while Mr. Peterson insisted on sending away to Denver for a proper crib. As Abigail's pregnancy progressed, Deacon became increasingly protective, taking on more of the household chores and hiring a ranch hand to help with the heavier work. Abigail bore his concern with good humor, reminding him that women had been having babies on the frontier since the first settlers arrived. I'm not made of glass, she told him one evening as he insisted on carrying water from the well despite her protests. The doctor says I'm healthy as a horse. Humor me, Deacon replied, kissing her forehead. It's my first time at this. Mine too, she reminded him with a smile. The baby arrived on a cold November night, with a midwife from town assisting and Deacon pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. After hours of labor, Abigail gave birth to a daughter small but strong, with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world. She's beautiful, Deacon whispered when the midwife finally allowed him to enter. He stood beside the bed, gazing in wonder at the tiny bundle in Abigail's arms. Just like her mother. What shall we name her? Abigail asked, exhausted but radiant. Deacon considered for a moment. What about Hope? He suggested. Because that's what she represents for us. For this place. Hope, Abigail repeated, looking down at their daughter's small face. Yes, that's perfect. Hope Grayson grew strong through that first winter, thriving on her mother's milk and her father's adoration. By spring, she was smiling and reaching for the world around her, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. As the seasons passed, the ranch prospered. Deacon's herd increased, and they added more acreage when a neighboring property became available. Abigail's garden expanded into a small orchard, with apple and cherry trees that promised future harvests. They built a larger barn, added a proper workshop, and began planning for the school that Willow Creek would need as more families arrived. 2 years after Hope's birth, Abigail gave birth to a son they named Thomas, in honor of the man whose memory remained a quiet presence in their lives. Little Thomas had his namesake's thoughtful nature and his father's strength, completing their family in ways they hadn't known were missing. 5 years into their marriage, on a warm summer evening much like the one when Deacon had first proposed, they sat together on the porch of their now expanded home. Hope played with her dolls nearby, while baby Thomas slept in Abigail's arms. In the distance, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. I was thinking about the day we met, Deacon said, his hand finding Abigail's on the arm of her rocking chair. How lost you looked, kneeling there with Thomas's coat. I was lost, Abigail acknowledged. I couldn't see any way forward. Just endless grief. And I was lost too, Deacon said. Just in a different way. Wandering without purpose, looking for justice, but finding little peace. Abigail squeezed his hand. You promised me a future of peace that day. Do you remember? I remember, Deacon nodded. Though I had no idea what that promise would come to mean. I think you kept it well, Abigail said, gazing out at the land they had built together, the home they had created. This is peace, isn't it? Not the absence of hardship or challenge, but the presence of love, of purpose. It is, Deacon agreed, leaning over to kiss her softly. And it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Hope ran to them then, climbing into her father's lap with a story about the birds she had seen at the creek. As Deacon listened intently to his daughter's chatter, his arm around Abigail and their son, Abigail thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from strangers to family. The bloody coat that had once represented everything she had lost was now stored away in a chest, a memorial to a love that had been real and precious. But it was no longer a symbol of an ending. Instead, it had become the beginning of something unexpected and beautiful, a promise kept, a future found, a peace that surpassed understanding. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast western sky, Abigail Grayson knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, not despite the tragedies and trials that had shaped her path, but because of them. Every tear, every struggle, every moment of despair had led her here, to this home, this family, this life built with love and courage on the wild frontier. And in that knowledge, she found the deepest peace of all.